Continuing from the previous episode, in spite of his earlier reservations, Ovadia actually went to King Achav and gave him the message that Eliyahu Hanavi was coming. And when King Achav went out to meet Eliyahu Hanavi and saw him, instead of taking any degree of responsibility for the tremendous famine over the past 3 years, King Achav shifted the blame to Eliyahu Hanavi himself, and he famously said, "Is that you, troublemaker of Yisrael?"
Welcome to Untold Stories of the Torah, a masterclass in Jewish history, presented by Rabbi Shmuel Aber.
Eliyahu Hanavi responded to King Achav, "I did not trouble Yisrael, but you and the house of your father when you abandoned the mitzvahs of Hashem and followed after the Baalim." And then Eliyahu tells King Achav that if he wanted rain, then he must agree to a competition, a challenge before all the Jewish people. Eliyahu against 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, the two popular idol-worshipping cults that existed in that day, on Mount Carmel in front of all the Jewish people. So King Achav called the Jewish people together and asked them to come and witness the competition on Mount Carmel, on Har Karmel. He forced his own prophets of Baal, the 450 prophets of Baal, to come against their will. They didn't want to come. King Achav forced them. Izebel, though, didn't permit her prophets of Asherah, which is a different idol-worshipping cult, to join the competition. Because they were supported by her, they were supported at her table, they weren't forced by King Achav to come, and they didn't come. So it was just Eliyahu Hanavi against 450 prophets of Baal. The Jewish people gathered as well. They wanted to see what was going on. And Eliyahu Hanavi famously called out to them, "Ad mosai atem poischim al shtei haseipim." How long will you be jumping between two different concepts? If Hashem is God, follow him. And if it's Baal, follow him. And the people didn't answer Eliyahu Hanavi back in response to Eliyahu Hanavi's claim. And Eliyahu Hanavi continued, and he said to the Jewish people like this, he said, "I alone have remained as a prophet of Hashem, and the prophets of the Baal total 450 men." The Medrash Rabbah famously says that everyone knew that Ovadia had hidden 100 prophets. And yet, in spite of that, not a single person corrected Eliyahu Hanavi when Eliyahu said that I alone remain as a prophet of Hashem. Everyone knew. It was an absolutely open secret, and people could have corrected Eliyahu Hanavi, got Ovadia in tremendous trouble, but no one said a word. Everyone remained silent about it. The Medrash says, in spite of the fact that that generation was filled with idol worshippers, there were many righteous people, but it was also filled with idol worshippers. The Jewish people had a very successful time during that era. They would go out to war, they would come back victorious, and it was all in the merit that they didn't inform on each other. Because they didn't inform on each other, Hashem was so impressed by that, and Hashem said, "Okay, I'll make them successful at war." Eliyahu Hanavi now prepares the terms of the competition. He says, "Have them give us 2 oxen, and let them choose 1 ox and cut it into pieces and place it on wood without fire. And I will prepare 1 ox and place it on the wood without fire. Then call in the name of your God, and I will call in the name of Hashem, and the God who responds with fire, he is God." A very straightforward competition. Whoever brings fire down on the altar with just wood and a sacrifice will be proven that they're the real God, otherwise not. The Jewish people liked the terms of the competition, and so that was it. Eliyahu Hanavi tells the prophets of Baal, "Because you're the many and I'm just one, you guys will go first, and when you're done, then I'll go next." And so the prophets of Baal did it. They prepared the altar, they placed the wood and the animal on top, and then they did their rituals. They called out, they screamed, they jumped, they hopped around the altar, and the verse says, and there was no voice and there was no answer, nothing happened. After waiting a certain degree of time, Eliyahu began to mock them. He actually began to poke fun at them. And he said, "Call with a loud voice, for he is a God." Perhaps he's conversing, or he's pursuing, or he's traveling. Rashi says that's a euphemism for using the restroom. Maybe your God's in the restroom. Perhaps he's sleeping and he'll awaken. Eliyahu Hanavi was actively mocking them as they were doing all their rituals to their cult. Yalkut Shimoni adds another dimension to the story. He says that Chiel, the man we mentioned earlier who had rebuilt the city of Yericho, decided to secretly smuggle himself underneath the altar. And when he would get the signs, the indications from the prophets of Baal, his plan was to secretly light the pyre from underneath. And yes, the fire wouldn't come from heaven, but at the same time, it would be a fire, and they would win the competition that way by cheating. And Hashem actually prepared a snake. The snake bit him, and he died. So they continued to scream, some of them knowing that he was there, hoping that he would hear, not realizing that he had actually died in the meantime. And they called out with loud voice, and they gashed themselves, as was their custom, with swords and spears until blood was pouring on them. And at mincha time, Eliyahu HaNavi called the people close, so they could see that he wasn't doing any tricks. He wanted to make sure that they could watch him up very close, as Mr. Stavid. Eliyahu HaNavi rebuilt the altar that King Shaul had originally built on Har Karmel. For more information of that story, listen to the podcast, the episode about Prince Yehoram. Eliyahu HaNavi prepared 12 stones corresponding to the 12 tribes. Additionally, Eliyahu HaNavi built a massive trench, a ditch, around the altar itself to gather more water. The size of the ditch, the trench, was the size of a field of crops. Rashi describes the size of the trench. It was absolutely massive and surrounded the entire altar. And then Eliyahu HaNavi prepared the sacrifice. He arranged the wood, he cut up the ox and he placed it on the wood. And then in Tanakh of Eliyahu, it says Eliyahu HaNavi asked his students if any of them had water. This was the end of a 3-year famine, a very, very dangerous and long famine. And his student Elisha, later to be his successor, said that he had. And so Eliyahu asked the student to pour 4 jugs of water over his hands 3 times, which is 12 in total. The Tanakh of Eliyahu says that the water fell from Eliyahu's hands, and then it continued to flow. And it spread, the water spread over the entire altar, soaking it entirely. And then it continued to flow even further, filling up the massive trenches of water that surrounded the altar. It was an incredible miracle. To such a degree, 10 springs worth of water flowed from Eliyahu HaNavi's hands from the water that Elisha poured over his hands. Tremendous miracle. And then, to make the miracle even greater, Eliyahu HaNavi stopped the sun from setting until the miracle was complete. And Eliyahu HaNavi prays to Hashem. Fire descends from heaven, burns up the sacrifice, which was all soaked, and the altar, which is all soaked. It also burnt up all the water in the trenches that surrounded the altar as well. The Jewish people who were all watching this very open miracle, they all bowed down. They said the very famous verse, Hashem hu elikim, Hashem hu elikim. They repeated it twice. Hashem is God, Hashem is God. They saw the miracle and they couldn't deny it anymore. The Abarbanel says Eliyahu HaNavi himself killed the prophets of Baal. The 450 prophets of Baal were killed by Eliyahu himself. And then he told King Achav to break his fast, to eat and drink. Eliyahu HaNavi prayed to Hashem. King Achav does tshuva, at least for that moment. He repents and returns to Hashem. And then Eliyahu tells King Achav, rush back to the city of Yezreel, rain is coming. And that was the official end of one of the worst famines in Jewish history, the 3-year famine during the times of King Achav. At some point later, Ovadia became a prophet. And unlike the 1.2 million prophets in Jewish history, whose prophecies we don't know at all, Ovadiah's prophecy was chosen to be written and chosen to be remembered for all of history. It was written down for all generations. In what merit did Ovadia have to become an actual prophet? The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Rabbi Yitzchak says, for what reason did Ovadia merit prophecy? It was because he concealed 100 prophets in a cave. It was in the merit of that tremendous self-sacrifice he had by taking those prophets, using his own money to save them and putting himself in tremendous debt in order to save them. That's the reason why Hashem gave him the incredible opportunity and honor of becoming a prophet of Hashem. In the Gemara in Yoma, it's also repeated in Sanhedrin, it says that Ovadia deserved the merit of prophecy because he was righteous. He didn't learn from the 2 evil people with whom he dwelt. He hung around Achav and Izebel. He did not learn from their ways, and therefore he merited to say a prophecy about the destruction of Edom. Edom is Esav. Esav is the forefather of the nation of Edom. Esav, though, was the exact opposite. Esav was a wicked man who dwelt among 2 righteous people, his parents, Yitzchak and Rivka. He didn't learn from them, though, and he remained evil. Ovadia was the flip opposite. He was righteous and he didn't learn from the people who he hung around. And therefore, it was only appropriate that Ovadia would talk about the downfall of Esav. The Ben Shai asks an incredible question: why is Yaakov not mentioned as well? And that's a tremendous answer to look up. Why was, though, Ovadia picked to tell the destruction of Esav? To become a prophet, we explained why he merited that, but why was he the one that was picked to say the destruction of Edom, to say this really awesome and terrifying prophecy foretelling the destruction of Edom? The Agadah Bereshith says it's to do with Esav. Avram Avinu, Abraham, had a tent, and passerbys from across the world would come to his tent, and he would, with incredible kindness, take care of these people. He would feed them and give them drink and give them place to sleep, etc. He gave tremendous care to strangers across the world, such an incredible degree of kindness. But when his grandson grew up, his grandson would take some of the guests and stand up, he'd kill them, and hide their bodies in caves. Even though his grandfather was such a tremendous righteous man, Esau would take some of his own grandfather's guests and kill them. Izebel, many years later, was killing prophets, and Ovadia used caves to hide those prophets. Hashem said like this: let Ovadia, who fed the prophets in caves, pay back against Esau's crimes, who killed people in caves. Another reason the Medrash gives is that Esau was born circumcised, but he rejected the circumcision. Ovadia, he was a convert. He wasn't born circumcised, but he decided to get circumcision on his own, to join the Jewish people. Hashem said, let Ovadia come, who is uncircumcised, but disgusted by it, and therefore circumcise himself and pay back against Esau, who was circumcised, but then tampered with his circumcision. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, another reason, Ephraim Mikshah, who was a student of Rabbi Meir, said in the name of Rabbi Meir, Ovadia wasn't just a regular convert, he was an Edomite convert. He came from Edom, he was a descendant of Esau. And this is as people say. From the forest itself comes the handle for the axe. Literally, translation from Mineu ve iba nezel be narga, which means from and within the forest comes the axe to it. In other words, because Ovadia came from Edom, he was the most appropriate one to prophesy their own downfall. Now, on the note of this famous saying, from the forest itself comes a handle for the axe, is an incredibly beautiful lesson in Tanya. At the beginning of chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe is explaining, for a person to be successful at being a Beinoni and be in complete control of their thought, speech, and action, the only way they can accomplish this is being in a perfect state of happiness. And to that end, the Alter Rebbe then discusses all the possibilities of what can make a person sad, and then lists the methods how to counteract that so a person can always remain in a state of joy. But at the very end of the conversation, the Alter Rebbe says, what if a person has a sadness that he can't identify per se? What if he doesn't know the cause of the sadness? He's just sad. The Alter Rebbe says, in that case, you're going to have to use the principle, Mineu ve'iba nezel be'naga. From the forest itself comes a handle for the axe. What does that mean? The Alter Rebbe suggests a person can humble himself, make himself bitter because of his lack of spiritual accomplishments, even though usually a person always has to serve Hashem with joy. This is an exception. He'll make himself bitter because he's not as spiritually accomplished as he needs to be. That bitterness will then be an axe to attack the forest, to attack the sadness. Dr. gives an example. Let's say a person might feel much more uplifted than that gentleman in the street. He says, listen, I'm a good guy, I behave nicely, this guy behaves dreadfully. But the Alter Rebbe suggests, you don't know how hard that guy's trying. It could be that although his behavior is absolutely dreadful, his fight is so much greater. He's fighting so hard, and yes, he's very, very unsuccessful, and he's doing sins left, right, and center, but he's still fighting far harder than you. You're smooth sailing. Yes, you're not doing as many sins, but you're not fighting evil as hard as he is. The temptation that he's dealing with and his fiery evil inclination is so much worse than yours. When you're comparing the actual degree of level of fight, he's fighting much harder. And when this elevated person who's sad thinks about that, they become extremely humble. They think to themselves, I'm not really fighting that hard. This guy, yes, he's not accomplishing perfection, not even close, but at the same time, he's fighting so hard. And following that bitterness, a person can then lift himself up. That's merely a tiny snapshot within a massive idea. I strongly recommend reading the 31st chapter of the Tanya. The Abarbanel says that Ovadia was not yet a prophet at the time of King Achav, but rather he was a person who feared God greatly. He was a tremendously righteous man, but not yet a prophet. Later on, though, he became a prophet. He received prophecy, and that's the famous Book of Ovadiah. That Book of Ovadiah is the prophecy that Ovadia got later on in the story, after the parts that we've already mentioned from the times of King Achav. Ovadia wrote the book of his prophecy. It's called Ovadia, the Book of Ovadiah. It's one of the books of the minor prophets, also known as Treyasai. And the book is a prophecy of the downfall of the nation of Edom. It's also Haftarah. We read the Haftarah once a year on Parshas V'Yishlach. It's one chapter with 21 verses, and it is the shortest book of the 24 books of the Torah. Interestingly, the Yalkut Shimoni says that Ovadiah's prophecy starts off with the word Chazoin Ovadia, a vision of Ovadia. There's another prophet that also uses the word Chazoin, Yeshaya Hanavi, Isaiah the prophet, also uses the word Chazoin. What does Chazoin mean? It means a vision. But if you do the numerical value of the word Chazoin, it equals, the gematria equals 71. And the Yalkut Shimoni says both Ovadia and Yeshaya, they both went to the court of 71 judges before they began prophesying, and they asked permission and said, "Can I prophesize?" Both of them got the sanction to go ahead with it, and then they began their prophecies. Another hint that can be found in the number 71 is both of their prophecies, Yeshaya, Isaiah, and Ovadia, they both translated their prophecies into 71 languages. Now, in this podcast, we're only going to touch upon the overall theme of the prophecy and talk about a few elements of the frightening prophecy. There is so much more to unpack. It's beyond the scope of this episode. I'm most certainly not going to try to interpret what the prophecy means in modern day, etc. But I'm just going to talk about the prophecy or elements of the prophecy as they've been explained by the earlier rabbis. This end of days event, which according to Abarbanel is an end of days event, according to Ibn Ezra, already happened, that Ovadia saw in the prophecy and foretold, is an event that many other prophets saw too. It wasn't just Ovadia. Ovadia, in fact, was the third prophet out of 9 different prophets that all speak about the same cataclysmic event, the same tremendous destruction of the nation of Edom. Who were the other prophets? The first one wasn't a Jewish prophet, it was Bilam. Then David HaMelech in Tehillim. Then Ovadia, the hero of our story. Then Yeshaya, Isaiah, then Yoel, Amos, Yirmiyahu, Yecheskel, and Malachi. All 9 of these prophets all spoke about the same exact event, the destruction of the nation of Edom. It's actually for this reason, says Abarbanel and others, that in Ovadiah's prophecy, towards the beginning, he says a really interesting statement. He says, Shemua shalmanu me'es Hashem, which means we have heard a message from Hashem. Ovadia was acknowledging that he was not the only one to prophesy, and he will not be the only one to prophesy about this. He understood that many prophets were going to see the same vision. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that even though many prophets all saw the same event, or even when prophets generally speaking see a same event, although they see the same event, they will speak it differently. And the Gemara brings Ovadia as a proof. Ovadia sees the event, Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu also sees the event of destruction of Edom, yet the words are similar, but the style is different, and the Gemara points to that. Now, who is Edom? We're talking about the destruction of the nation of Edom. Obviously, they're descendants of Esav, the brother of Yaakov, the son of Yitzchak and Rivka, but who is Edom? Edom literally is a nation descending from Esav who live in the southeast of Israel during the times of the Torah. During the time when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, on the way there, Moshe spoke to the kingdom of Edom. During the times of the kings later on, especially, the nation of Edom is going to come up shortly after this, after the story of Ovadia in history. The Abarbanel, though, says that Edom that Ovadia is talking about is not just the geographic location of Edom as it is in the south of Israel, but also the continued offshoot of that nation as they moved northwest to Italy and then intermingled with them, and later on becoming the Roman Empire. The Abarbanel says the Roman Empire is a representation of the nation of Edom. That's the Abarbanel's opinion. There are those that disagree, though. An interesting observation, which is my own observation, in the prophecy itself, it does not talk about any part that the Jewish people play in the prophecy. The Jewish people are mentioned as victims of Edom, and then only passive observers of the destruction. They do not play any part in the actual destruction of the nation of Edom at all. Now let's take a few ideas from the prophecy itself. What will trigger this cataclysmic event? The Abarbanel talks in great detail about it. He says that Edom will want to control Jerusalem because of its relevance to their religion. And so Edom will attack Egypt to gain control of Jerusalem. They'll be successful, says the Abarbanel, and they'll win against Egypt, conquering Jerusalem and also conquering the entire land of Israel. And following that, word will spread across the Arab world that Egypt was attacked. And these nations, descendants of Ishmael, will then send messengers to the east and to the north to gather for war in response to Edom's attack of Egypt, but also in fear of what Edom plans to do to them. And they will gather together and attack Edom. The Book of Ovadiah says, an ambassador is sent among the nations. Arise and let us rise up against her in battle. Now, what will Edom's social standing be at the time of this great war? Ovadia says in the second verse, it says, behold, I will make you least among the nations. You shall be most despised. Ovadia prophesies that Edom during the time of this great war will be very, very despised, very small. Rashi says Edom is called small and despised. Number one, because they don't appoint kings, the son of kings. And number two, because they don't have their own spoken language or written language. The Radak says they'll be so despised that the rest of the world won't even care if they're destroyed. What about the allies of Edom? The verse talks about that. Ovadia says, all your allies turned you back at the frontier. The men who were at peace with you have duped and overcome you. The Metzudas David says that the allies of Edom are going to escort Edom to this battle. But once they reach the edge of the battle, they will deceive Edom and turn around and leave Edom to fight on their own. Obviously, the question is, why does Edom deserve this punishment? This is very, very intense prophecy of the destruction of Edom. Why does Edom deserve it? Ovadia writes, on the day that you stood from afar, on the day that strangers captured his wealth, and foreigners came to his gates and cast lots upon Yerushalayim, you too were like one of them. Now, what does that mean? Rashi explains, Edom didn't help the Jewish people during their times of need, and therefore they deserve blame. Even Ezra says it's to do with the first temple. When Babylon was persecuting the Jewish people during the destruction of the first temple, they joined the Babylonians and they also delivered Jewish people into the hands of the Babylonians. The Radak says Edom's wickedness was during the times of the second temple. Rome destroyed the second temple. They killed a tremendous amount of Jews. In fact, according to some opinions, that was the largest Holocaust in Jewish history. Is it a complete annihilation of Edom or not? From the verses, it seems that it's very clear it's going to be a complete destruction of everyone from Edom, though I'm going to tell you a Gemara afterwards, which implies very much not so. But here's the verses from Ovadia. And thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that everyone from the mount of Esav shall be cut off by slaughter. And another verse in the prophecy says, for your violence against your brother Yaakov, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. And one third verse, and there shall be no remaining of the house of Esav, for Hashem has spoken it. Now, there's an important Gemara in Avodah Zarah. In the Gemara, the Roman Emperor Antoninus has a conversation with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Antoninus was a very powerful emperor of Rome. He was extremely close friends with the leader of the Jewish people called Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah. And they would have conversations, many of them which are recorded. He once asked his good friend, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the leader of the Jewish people, he asked them, you talk about Mashiach, the world to come, will I be a part of this world to come? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi answered him, yes. Antoninus was a very righteous man. Antoninus said, but what about Ovadia? All these prophecies in Ovadia talking about the destruction of Edom. Antoninus was a Roman. And he quoted back to Rebbe, he says, the verse says, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esav. So Rebbe answered him back, very importantly. He said, that's a reference to those descendants that behave like Esav. In other words, the destruction of Edom is for descendants of Esav, descendants of Edom, who behave like their ancestor, but not for the righteous descendants. Ovadia passes away. In fact, there's a story that happened right before he passed away. There's a medrash called Medrash V'Isha Achas. And it's also mentioned by the Radak in the name of the Tosefta. It says that before Ovadia passed away, his wife asked him how they're going to support themselves. They were penniless. They were in tremendous debt to the prince. And Ovadia assured his wife, she'll be fine. Hashem has promised, leave your orphans with me. I will rear them. Let your widows rely on me. Ovadia assured his wife, don't worry about the debt. You'll be fine. And Ovadia passed away. The Zohar Chadash, in fact, says the same time when King Achav passed away, Ovadia passed away. They passed away at the same time. King Achav was killed in battle. But they passed away in the Jewish year 3041, which is about a little more than 2,700 years ago. After King Achav passed away, he was succeeded by his son, King Achazyahu. King Achazyahu reigned for a very short amount of time, only 2 years. He was really badly injured from a fall from a roof. He fell from a lattice on his loft in Shomron. He was injured, he was put in a bed, and he sent messages to one of his idol-worshipping cults asking, is he going to recover from his injuries? On the way there, Eliyahu Navi was instructed to stop the messenger, and he criticized Achazyahu, and Eliyahu prophesied about Achazyahu that he's not going to get up from the bed. His injury that placed him in bed, he's never going to get up from it. He's going to die in his bed. And that's exactly what happened. King Achazyahu died in his bed from his injuries. He did not have any sons, and so therefore his crown went to his brother Yehoram, the same prince who had lent Ovadia a tremendous fortune of money along with interest. This man, King Yehoram, is now the king of the Jewish people. And so 2 years after Ovadia passes away, King Yehoram, now king of the north of Israel, comes to Ovadia's wife to collect the payment along with the interest that Ovadia promised. She couldn't provide it. They were penniless. And the Barbanel points out she didn't even have any property to transfer in exchange of the money. She was literally penniless. The only thing she owned was a small jug of oil. She had absolutely nothing left. So King Yehoram, seeing that she couldn't pay the bill, demanded that she give over her 2 sons as slaves instead. He wanted them to come to her house and to work as servants. And so she didn't know what to do. She cries out to Hashem. The Medrash and the Radak says she cried out either 271 times or 265 times to Elisha, to Hashem. She didn't get any answer. And the Medrash even records some of the incredible arguments she gave to Hashem when she was crying out in prayer. And then in complete desperation, she went to the cemetery together with the 2 orphans, and she cried out, one who fears Hashem, one who fears Hashem. She's crying out for her husband. And she hears a voice. She's at the cemetery, she's calling out for her husband, labeling him as the one who fears Hashem, and she hears a voice from among the graves, and the voice says, who is the one that fears Hashem that you want? 4 people in the Torah are described as fearing Hashem: Avraham, Yosef, Ovadia, and Eiv. So from the cemetery, there was a voice that she heard, and the voice said, which one do you want? So she responded very cleverly. She said, I want the one that fears Hashem exceedingly. Only one person in history is ever described like that, Ovadia. So they showed her the grave of Ovadia. She went there to her husband's grave. She took dust, she threw it on her head, she rolled in the ground, and she cried out, my husband, they're requesting your debts, and they're coming to take your 2 sons for the debts. And she continued, she told him, didn't you assure me before you passed away that Hashem will take care of us? That Hashem has promised, leave your orphans with me, I will rear them, let your widows rely on me. And she continued to her husband, and now your holy children are going to grow up in the house of Achav and Izebel. The 2 children who were standing next to her, they screamed out, they stretched out their hands and they screamed out, take us, Father, take us, Father. They didn't want this situation. So Ovadia from the next world responds to his wife like this. Ovadia says, go to Elisha with the little oil that you have left, and he will bless you with it. And Ovadia explains, he says, when I hid the 100 prophets in the caves, I never failed to give the prophets oil for their lamps day and night. These prophets that were in the cave, they were learning Torah. And Ovadia gave them oil so they could learn Torah. And told his wife, let the prophet remind Hashem about my behavior, and he will take care of you. So Ovadia's wife goes to the leader of the generation, who's now Elisha, and the Medrash says Ovadia went to Elisha with her children in sackcloth. When Elisha saw her, he recognized that she and her children were coming from her husband's grave. And the Barbanel says that Elisha knew Ovadia. and knew his prophecies concerning of Edom as well. And the next part of the story is extremely famous. It starts off, Isha achas minashe b'nei hanavim, a woman, a wife of one of the disciples of the prophet, this is Ovadiah's wife, cried out to Elisha saying, your servant, my husband died. My husband is a reference to Ovadia. And you know that your servant was one who feared Hashem. Ovadia was a man famous for fearing Hashem. And she continued, telling Elisha, now the creditor, King Yehoram, has come to take my 2 sons for himself as slaves. Ramani and Medrash Tanchuma talks about the greatness of the wife of Ovadia. She herself was a tremendously righteous woman. If not for the merit of the wife of Ovadia, says Ramani, all the Jewish people would have been finished at that time. Her merit alone kept them alive. So Elisha hears her complaint, and Elisha asks her, what can I do for you? Tell me what you have in your house. So she answers, your maidservant has nothing in the house except for a jar of oil. The Ralbag explains, a jar of oil, osach shemen, doesn't mean a big jar of oil. It's that little container that one uses to rub with. It's a tiny little container of oil. It's nothing. The Abarban explains, why did Elisha ask what she had in her house? The Abarban explains that it's the way of prophets to connect their miracle to something tangible. So the miracle won't be a miracle something from nothing. They always prefer not to make a miracle something out of nothing. So therefore, he asked her, what do you have in your house that I can make a miracle from? From Hashem, of course. And in her case, her poverty was just so extreme. She literally had nothing else except for a little jug of oil. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in fact, says that when a person benches, when they do the after-meal blessings, they should keep the tablecloth and the bread on the table while they're doing the blessings. Why? Because Hashem's blessings don't go on emptiness. It's an empty table. We want something to be on the table, so when we do the benching, when we do the after-meal blessings, it should go on something that actually exists, something that's actually on the table. So now Elisha tells Ovadiah's wife, go borrow containers from the outside, from all your neighbors. Empty containers, do not skimp. Don't skimp on them. Get as many as you can. Kelim reikim al tamiti. And the Mesilas David says, Elisha was telling him, al tamiti. Don't just get a few containers. Get a lot. Get as many as you can. And Elisha continues with the instruction. He tells her, and then come in and close the door behind yourself and behind your sons. Rashi says it's always an honor to a miracle when it's done in private. And then what should she do? She should pour into all these containers, and the full ones you should then remove. Rashi explains, what does that mean? What's the instructions? The instructions are like this. Ovadiah's wife should place the oil in a downwards position and then not move. She should stay perfectly still. And instead of moving that small little flask of oil to the containers that she borrowed, she should keep her little jug still and move the containers to the jug. And then when they're full, move the large, heavy ones out of the way and move another one underneath the flow of the little jug she's holding. The reason is because Hashem is making a miracle that her little jug of oil should now be like a spring. Springs don't move. Springs always stay in the same spot in the ground. So now that her jug of oil is like a spring, she has to keep it perfectly still. All the large containers that she borrowed, she should bring them underneath and then move them away. The Radak adds that Elisha was telling her the miracle is going to occur from the moment where you start. That spot's going to be miraculous, which means you can't move your little jug around. You have to move everything else to it. The Malbim actually presents 3 conditions for the miracle. Number 1, that she not move from her spot while pouring. Number 2, that once she starts pouring, she continue pouring until the end. And number 3 condition is that she only pour into vessels that she borrowed from her neighbors. Now, the Medrash says that when Ovadiah's wife heard from Elisha what was going to happen, she told Elisha, let's do this miracle in public. Why are you telling me to go into my house and shut the door behind me? Let's do this in the street. Let's let everyone watch this. It's a tremendous miracle from Hashem. And Elisha answered her, your husband supported the prophets in private, implying that the miracle should also be done in private, just the way your husband did it so privately. An interesting question, of course, is when the wife of Ovadia came and introduced who her husband was, she describes her husband as someone who fears Hashem. But she could have said her husband's a prophet of Hashem. At this point in the story, Ovadia already passed away. He had already been a prophet. Why did she say he only feared Hashem, which is still great, instead of saying he was a prophet of Hashem? And the Rabbanah says either it was because of her great humility, she didn't want to boast about her husband's accomplishments, so she just mentioned he feared Hashem. Or it could be because it was only a small prophecy, she didn't want to mention it, especially since the verses itself already mentioned that he was a prophet. The Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, has a reinterpreting of the story that lists the story not as a story just between Elisha and Ovadiah's wife, but it's actually a conversation between the soul and God. It's tremendous, a tremendous lesson. I'm going to just give a short version of it. He says like this. The story is the soul cries out to Hashem, to God. The soul, which is a reference to Ovadiah's wife, cries out to Hashem that its love, a reference to Ovadia that has died, and the animalistic, which is a reference to King Yehoram, is coming to seize her love and fear for its own selfish desires. So the soul's crying out to God, help me. And what's God's advice to the soul? God asks the soul, what energy do you have, soul, that hasn't yet conquered? And so the soul responds that everything's gone. The only thing that's left is the innermost essence of the soul, the level of chacham of the soul, the untouchable godly spark of the soul. That's still there, the jug of oil. And what is this? What is this piece of the soul? It's the level of the soul that triggers that when a person's in a life and death situation, and they're told, for example, to bow down to an idol, otherwise they're going to be killed. And throughout history, millions and millions of Jews have been willing to give up their life rather than bow down to the idol. What's that? That's that piece of the soul. That piece of the soul is absolutely untouchable. It only wakes up in extreme moments, but it's always there. And so the soul cries out to God, that's all I have left. I have that power of mysterious nefesh, the power of giving up my life for God, that love of God, that's the only thing that remains. So Hashem's advice for the soul is, okay, go do Torah and mitzvahs. Even though, yes, you say you don't have feelings of love and fear, they're empty vessels, don't lessen your Torah and mitzvahs. Go and continue doing Torah and mitzvahs. And when you're involved in your Torah and mitzvahs, remember that you have this piece of self-sacrifice love deep within yourself. It's not revealed, it's not on the open yet, but remind yourself that it exists. And then when you do whatever mitzvah it is and you're not feeling anything, you have this apathy, this emptiness, remind yourself that you really would be willing to give up your life for God. And utilizing that love that's deep inside yourself, you don't have to create it. It's already there. It's always there. It's untouchable, but you remind yourself that you have it. You connect that to the mitzvah. You remind yourself, I'd be willing to give up my life for God. Okay, I really do love God. And that remembrance, you do it while you're doing the mitzvah. And what happens? That actually gives you real love. It gives you a real love of God and a real fear of God. And it's something that you can actually connect to a mitzvah. Now you're doing a mitzvah. Now you're learning Torah with a real love and fear of God. After hearing the advice of Elisha, she went from him and closed the door behind herself and behind her sons, and they would bring the containers to her and she would pour. So she implemented what Elisha said, this tremendous miracle. From a tiny little jug of oil, now is going to be a tremendous amount of oil, but she did it. The prophet said to do something, she listened. And when the containers were full, the miracle actually occurred. She said to her son, bring me another container. She kept on pouring. She asked for another container, and he said to her, there is no other containers. And at that moment, the oil stopped. V'yamoid hashamen, at that moment, the oil stopped. The Radak even says that before the oil stopped, her sons told her that there's nothing else left. So she asked her son, do we have any broken pieces of container? And they said, yes. So she told them, bring it. And she said, bring them to me, because just as Hashem can feel what is empty, he can also mend what's broken. They brought the broken pieces of containers to her, and when she poured the oil over them, the broken pieces all formed together to create perfect barrels, and she poured the oil inside. And then she was ready to sell it. Medrash Rabbah says, Rashi brings it down as well, that when she was ready to sell the oil, she discovered that the price had shot up. The price had been very cheap until that point, and then suddenly now oil was at an all-time high. And the H. Yosef says she had a seller's dilemma. She didn't know what to do. Maybe she should wait even longer and the prices will continue to rise, or maybe she should sell now before the prices go back down. So what did she do? She went back to Elisha and she asked Elisha, what should I do? Should I sell or should I wait? And the verse says she came and told the man of God, the man of Hashem, Elisha, and he said, Elisha told her, go sell the oil and pay your creditors, and you and your sons will live on the remainder. Medrash Rabbah says, Rashi brings this down as well, that Elisha told her they would make so much money off the oil that she and her sons would be able to support themselves until the coming of Mashiach, until the dead would actually come back alive. That's how wealthy she became from the story. While she was with Elisha, she asked a few questions. The Radak, quoting the Tosefta, says that she asked Elisha, from the money, all this oil, do I need to give tithe to charity? Do I need to give Maisa from this oil? And Elisha answered her, your husband sustained the prophets of Hashem with something that wasn't subject to tithe, you too, your oil has no tithe. It's from a miracle. Continues the Radak. She asked, but I have another problem. What about the king? King Yehoram was not a righteous man, and he's going to hear about this tremendous miracle and this incredible oil that I got. He's going to confiscate it. So Elisha told her, he who shuts the mouths of the dogs in Egypt and will in the future shut the mouths of the lions in the story of Daniel will blind the eyes of Achav's sons and seal their ears that they won't trouble you. Elisha told Ovadiah's wife, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. The Chidah in Nachal Sorek says that she was also worried from a spiritual level. She was very concerned about using miraculous items for personal gain. This oil was miraculous. It started off as a tiny little jug of oil, and now she was filled with expensive oil. She was worried about benefiting from that. She said, it's miraculous. Maybe I shouldn't touch it. The Chidah says that Elisha told her like this. The miracle was that she was able to have enough oil to pay off her debt so her sons wouldn't be slaves. The fact that the oil prices surged, that wasn't such a great miracle. That was a miracle that was more enwrapped within nature, and therefore it's perfectly permissible for her to use that oil or the money from that oil because that was just an extra miracle on top of the main miracle. Additionally, he suggests that Elisha told her, Hashem told me you're allowed to, and that was that. The end of the story, what happened to King Yehoram in the end? Eventually, 14 years later, in the year 3055, Yoina was sent by Elisha to anoint Yehu as the king of the north of Israel. King Yehoram was still king, and Yehu was anointed as king, and then King Yehu was instructed by Yoina in the name of Hashem to wipe out the entire family. The evil had reached such a degree, Hashem wanted the entire family to be wiped out. King Yehu set a complex trap for King Yehoram and his family, which was actually successful. The Medrash actually said that Yehu, based on the verse, that Yehu drew his bow and smote Yehoram between his shoulders, and the arrow came out from his heart. Why the arrow came up between his heart? He had hardened his heart and accepted money with interest, so that's why he was punished and the arrow went through his heart. He had taken interest from Ovadia, an incredible man who went to such extreme measures to save the prophets of Hashem, and therefore King Yehoram was duly punished. If you want to learn more about the downfall of the house of Omri and the assassination of King Yehoram, you could go back to the series of the story of Yoina.
Thank you for listening to Untold Stories of the Torah. If you enjoyed this episode, help us spread the word by subscribing to this channel and leaving us a review.